All right, so basically I'm going to be giving a composting workshop here at Buctouche First Nation. So here we got some compost bins that were provided by the Kent Regional Service Commission, thanks to a grant by ETF, by Environmental Trust Fund. So what we're doing this for is to spread the knowledge on how to make compost, reduce the cost of creating fertile soil so that we can produce more food in communities, empower communities to produce their own food at a lower cost so that we can put more food on people's tables throughout Kent County. Welcome to Buctouche First Nations brand new community garden. So we just set this up in the last couple of weeks, and we started planting a little bit last week. So we got some tomatoes, we got a few things growing. We planted a bunch of seeds. They're not up yet, but we're hoping that they'll be up very shortly. So I set up here the compost bin. This is a 2-bay system. Typically you'll see a 3-bay system. At home for my own use, I don't usually use this middle wall here. I just use a big bay that's around this size. And that's sufficient for all of my household needs for producing compost. And possibly a little bit more than I need, but you can never have enough compost. Compost is like the gold of gardening, so we want to produce as much as possible. So why this dimension? This dimension here, it's 4 foot wide, 5 foot by 5 foot by 4 foot tall. This, if we can fill this up to the brim, we'll have a volume that's sufficient enough to get hot. And even though it'll shrink to about a third of its original size, it'll still produce, by the time it's finished shrinking, the volume of compost that's left over will be sufficient to provide all of the nutrients that we need for this garden and more, as well the garden beds that are on the ground over there as well. So the soil needs to be kind of replenished a little bit every year because the rain washes a lot of it off. So here we've got some raised bed boxes, and because they're above ground, any rain will wash away a lot of those nutrients like phosphorus and potassium, and especially nitrogen. All of these are water soluble, so every time it rains on this, we lose a lot of it. So that's why it's important to replace it when we're making compost. So it stays, fertile and productive over the long term. So to get things started, I typically like to start. These are some of the fall leaves that I collected last fall. So basically, there we go. Do we have the hose handy? Is it in your bag? Okay, right on.
Is it safe for chickens to go around the compost too?
Yeah. Oh, as a matter of fact, some folks, what they do is actually they use their chickens to make their compost for them. Okay.
Should be on.
Right on. So basically, we just want to soak it all down. You'll see it kind of sag a little bit with the moisture. Yeah, for chickens with composting, there's some setups where folks will just bring in organic waste, like stuff like old expired vegetables and stuff like that from a grocery store, and they'll put it in your chicken coop on the uphill side. They have it on a slope. They put it on the uphill side. The chickens go through it. They stir it up. They eat all of the good stuff, and they eat any bugs that's in there, and they'll stir it. and it accumulates. The good stuff accumulates at the bottom after they finish processing it, at the bottom of that hill. You continuously do that over the course of a year. At the end of a year, you can collect that stuff at the bottom and put it straight into your compost pile. Now, so chickens are really, really important for creating fertility for gardening. They're useful for producing eggs. They're great pest control. They'll eat all your bugs. So you send them out into your garden in the spring, and they'll eat all the bugs that are in your garden beds before you plant your garden, clean them all out, and then you try to keep them out of your garden because they can be very destructive once your plants are growing. But as an assist to gardening, chickens are fantastic. So I put down my first layer of noodles, basically the lasagna method. Basically, you put in a thick layer of carbon-rich material. Here we got leaves. And then I got here a little bit of chicken manure. So this is a year old, so it shouldn't be too stinky. I started digging it this morning before coming here. I went through my chicken coop and started digging out some stuff that was a little raw. And I figured, no, I'm going to lose the crowd if I bring that stuff here. So I brought this older stuff so it's not so smelly. So basically, you just add a little bit here and there, break it up a bit if you need to. Yeah, just a couple of shovelfuls. Sprinkle it around a little bit. Okay.
And that's your 5% ratio?
That's your 5% ratio about. Yeah, you just put a little bit. So you saw how much leaves, a full bag full of leaves, and about 3 or 4 shovelfuls of manure, and that's sufficient. You soak that up too. So between each layer, just give it a little soak. So all the organisms that we're looking for, the soil-borne organisms, live in the soil. So if you put your compost directly on the ground, they're there. So we don't have to add inoculants or other materials or any other products in there. They live in nature everywhere. And if you give them the food and the materials that they need to thrive, they'll get active. So we got 1 layer of leaves, 1 layer of manure. And put down some more leaves. These bags are a little smaller, so I'll put 2 bags full.
Can you keep your leaves?
Well, you can keep them indefinitely. They'll start to decompose in the bags.
Oh, okay.
If you leave them in the bags, they'll turn into leaf mold. So after 3 years in a bag like this, leaves will turn into leaf mold. It's something, the leaf mold is like the leaves kind of all break down, turn dark. There's not a lot of vitamins in it, but there's no better stuff to start seeds in it than leaf mold.
Oh, yeah?
So if you leave a couple of bags to sit and you want to start seeds in the spring, like in early spring, you want to start seeds indoors, that's your seed starting mix. It's in nature. That's exactly how nature seeds are used to growing in this kind of stuff that's been decomposing on the soil surface. And so basically we're simulating nature. So nature is a very important part of gardening, and understanding these concepts will help you make a garden that's going to really just come alive. So we got another layer of leaves. And you spread it out. So you don't want like a big thick chunks. Basically, if we can spread it out as evenly as possible, so that there's no spot that gets hotter or colder than the rest. This whole thing's kind of uniform, and it works out like that. So I brought a substitute for manure. This is comfrey. It's a plant that's a wild plant. Let's see if I can take one out here to show you. So it's a wild plant. It grows reasonably bushy. It's got these lovely little rosettes of purple flowers. This is very, very rich in protein. So this is a good feed for animals, livestock. Chickens eat this. It's really good for their health. We can make tea out of this. It's got a lot of medicinal properties. You don't want to have too much of it though, because some of these properties, like any medicine, you don't want to go overboard with it. You want to balance things out. But comfrey is really, really high in protein. And because it's so high in protein, it can be a great substitute for manure. So this is basically, this whole bag was one plant that I had growing in my thing.
Where do you find it at?
This grows in ditches. It grows all over the place.
Oh, yeah?
It's farmers will hate you if you let this grow in their farmer's field though. The roots of this plant are very vigorous, and any little piece of root will, like if you till it, you break it up, you're just multiplying your plants. So you do not want to let this grow in a farmer's field where tillage is going to be done. Okay, so that your farmer will hate you if this ends up being in their field. Okay, but I like planting these next to fruit trees, because the fruit trees will really benefit from this growing there. These roots grow really, really, really deep. The root mass on this thing is incredible. And it reaches really deep and collects some nutrients that are no longer accessible to soil surface plants. It'll bring them up to the surface, and those nutrients are all over these leaves, all inside there. So as it decomposes in your compost, it releases all those nutrients, all of that nitrogen, and all of these things. It's great for compost. It's great for gardening. It's great for enriching soil all around. It's just you want to use it with care. So that's a substitute for manure. So we don't need to go and use manures, and there's potential for E. coli in manures. So if you're nervous about that, you don't have to be. There's other alternatives to make compost. There's a lot of different ways of making compost. As long as you get materials that are rich in your carbon and your nitrogen, you should be good. Right on. So now we put another layer of leaves, and basically it's rinse and repeat. A layer of leaves, a layer of nitrogen stuff, a layer of hay, a layer of nitrogen rich stuff. Just layer it up until you fill it all the way up to the top, and you can keep going. You can mound it as tall as possible. Your compost will work better if you mound it tall rather than wide, right? Because as it's tall, it'll start to shrink from the top and come down. But if it's wider than tall, as it starts to shrink, we'll have a volume that's less than a cubic meter, and it'll stop heating up because of that. So going tall ensures a better cook of your compost. So here we got some grass clippings mixed in with leaves. So this is half decomposed already. So basically, because the grasses were mixed in with the leaves, it was mowed together. It already started to decompose, and we're getting
Good lunch.
a good. Well, yeah, exactly. Well, it's good worm food.
Burger pack.
There we go.
Every layer, got a
Layer of water. Now we can go in with some more manure, and it's like just rinse and repeat, just over and over again until you're filled up. And we can continue to work at filling this through the summer months into the fall. And by this fall, before the snow comes, we should have a pile that's a good height. It'll get hot. And when it reaches heat, it'll get to a temperature around 60 degrees Celsius. So you can tell it's getting hot. If you dig open, you do that, you open it up like that, and there's smoke that comes out. There's like steam that comes out. If you stick your hand in there, it'll be too hot for it to be comfortable. Then you know that you're cooking. Once the compost is cooking, that's where all of your pest, insect eggs, they're getting cooked. All of your seeds from your weeds, they're getting cooked. Most things don't survive these temperatures. So what happens is that it just creates an environment where only the bacteria that make compost are the only things that survive in this. So it basically pasteurizes your material. So it's safe to use in your garden. And that's what we're aiming for. So it'll, as it gets built up, about 4 days after the compost pile is built at full height, then you'll notice that it starts to get hot. And it'll stay hot for a week or two. Then it starts to cool off. Once it's cooled down, then we can just take all of this material and just move it over onto that side. And by moving it over, we're mixing air back into it. We're re-oxygenating the material. So the beneficial bacteria that live in there, suddenly they get a shot of fresh air in there, and the party starts up again. And everybody's getting active. So basically the heat comes from all of these bacteria being really active, having a great time. You know, it's a big buffet meal. There's a dance, a party. Everybody's having a good time. It's kind of like when we have a dance. At the dance hall, you get a small room, a bunch of people dancing. It gets hot. Same principle. So that's where your source of heat. It's not a chemical source of heat. It's a biological source of heat. And, you know, in its charge, it's fed by oxygen-rich environment. So we need to make sure that it gets that oxygen. And what happens is that like I mentioned a while ago, the compost, it works from the inside out. So the middle of your pile will start to change. But the outside, you wouldn't be able to tell from the outside. So the outside will still look like this. So one of the reasons why we want to mix it all up and turn it over is to make sure that all the stuff that's on the outside that didn't get the full heat treatment ends up in the middle of your pile and it gets a heat treatment too. So if you turn it twice, maybe 3 times, it should be sufficient to give all of your material the heat treatment it needs to get rid of all of your bad bugs, all of your pests and diseases and weed seeds and all of those things. It clears things out and everything gets transformed into this beautiful black rich material that kind of looks like this right here. So here we planted some seeds. I don't want to take it from where we planted, but basically we get a nice dark material like this. And it kind of, you can find little bits in there that you might recognize. Oh, there's a little piece of wood or a little piece of a stem of a leaf. But for the most part, it all looks just like nice, dark, rich chocolate cake, right? And chocolate cake soil is the gold standard of garden soil. And this is how you get it. By turning leaves and grass clippings and organic matter that we find just lying around our yard. So you clean up your yard, instead of sending up all of that yard waste to the dump, where it's a waste and it's a problem, you know, make use of it. This is a resource that comes back every year. Every time we do yard work, we're producing a lot of this material, and it already belongs to us. So why throw it out? Let's keep it in the yard. Let's make use of it, pile it up. It doesn't have to be in a bin. The bin here really, at the end of the day, is just there to give you an idea of how much volume, how big of a pile you need to make. And if we aim to fill this bay every year, we'll end up with a sufficient amount of compost to keep our gardens functional forever. We just have to keep up with that. A 2-inch layer of compost on the soil surface of your garden is all your garden needs to stay fertile every year. So we only need to aim to add a 2-inch layer. If we have more, great. But 2 inches is about your minimum. And that's basically how you make compost, right? So once it's all done, it's not going to look like compost like you buy in a bag at the store. So what they do in the commercial areas, because consumers, people who go buy things in the store, are a little bit fussy, and we want things to be perfect. Your store wants to give you a compost that looks like it's refined, it's beautiful stuff. So they sift it. They get rid of all of your bigger pieces, and they just give you your fine grain little stuff. But the thing is, in a compost on your garden, having bits of different sizes helps to open up air passages in your soil, right? So it lets air infiltrate into your soil. So like I mentioned a while ago, oxygen is really important for your beneficial bacteria in your compost. It's the same bacteria that lives in your soil that makes your soil grow, makes your plants grow, right? So you want to make sure that you're keeping oxygen in your soil surface as well. So these bits of different sizes, decomposing at different rates over the long term, will give you long-term fertility as some bits decompose slower. And because the bits are different sizes, it keeps little gaps and airways open so the air can infiltrate a little bit deeper into your soil. Last thing you want to have is a crust on the top of your soil surface that's waterproof and airtight. That's what happens with bare soil. So when we till our gardens and we leave the soil bare, the rain comes, it splashes on our soil, and it kind of creates a crust on the top of that soil surface that is airtight. And if you water it, the water drips off. It doesn't absorb really well. So that creates these issues with soil function. By adding mulch of compost, and by mulch, I don't mean like a bagged mulch like made out of wood chips and that kind of stuff. A mulch is any organic matter that sits on the soil that protects your soil surface from sun's rays. So compost can function like that. And basically, it keeps your soil open. Water infiltrates really easy. So when you're watering your garden, the water doesn't flow into your walkway instead of staying on top of where your plants are. Sometimes you water your plants and you can dig where you watered, and you notice that the water only went in this deep, and underneath that it's all dry. And that's what happens with bare soil. So adding your compost, the water just as soon as you water, it just sinks right in, right deep, right away. It doesn't pool on the surface. And then you have a good functional soil, a soil that drinks water, absorbs air, has everything that it needs to make the plants grow. So here with composting, we're not feeding the plants, we're feeding the soil and the soil organisms. And the soil organisms, are the ones that make our plants healthy. And basically, to continue, I need a layer of manure, do I? All right. Where's my fork? I'll break it up a little bit. Another bag full. Now, a lot of folks have a leaf blower. Does anybody here own a leaf blower? Yeah? Okay. So you blow your leaves out of your driveway with your leaf blower. Did you know that there's also a vacuum function on your leaf blower that will vacuum up your leaves and shred them and put them in a little bag? It comes in your box. Most often than not, it's never used. But by shredding leaves in a smaller pieces, smaller sizes, they decompose quicker. So you want to speed things up and get a faster compost. Shred that up. You can use a leaf blower to shred it up. You can take your leaves, you can put it in just throw them on the ground and suck them up and shred them and just throw them in your compost pile. Or you can run them over with a bagging mower and shred them up that way. And then you get really good, small, finely graded, finely broken up pieces of leaves, and they decompose that twice or 3 times faster if you do that. If you're in a hurry and you want to have compost in a month, that's how you do it. Spread it around. All right, so here we've got a maple leaf that has black spots on it. Okay, so this is a disease, it's a fungal disease that affects maple leaves, but because we're making a hot compost, it's not going to spread to other trees because the heat is going to kill this fungus. Okay, so we don't need to worry about like blight on our tomato leaves. We hear tell that you can't put your blighty tomato leaves in your compost. It'll just create a blighty compost. That's not true. Your compost will cook your blight. Blight exists. It's a fungus that just grows on all soil. It grows everywhere. Blight is already everywhere. So we don't need to worry about it so much. We just, for blight in our tomatoes, what we want to do is we just want to prevent your mud from the soil surface splashing on your tomato leaves. So we want to remove, basically tomatoes they're like a lady with a skirt. She wants to have her legs bare and your skirt goes up to around her knees, which is about 8 inches off the ground. Okay? So you remove all the leaves so just the stems are visible so the air can flow underneath the plant and dry out the leaves in between rains. And then you put a layer of mulch. I like to use seaweed as a mulch at the base of my tomato plants. And that way, when the rain falls, it falls on the seaweed and the mud can't splash back up onto your tomato because there's that layer of seaweed in the way. Seaweed doesn't have any weed seeds in it to create, conditions where other things will start to grow in your garden bed. And there's not enough salt on seaweed to affect your plant. Usually seaweed collects on the beaches during a rainstorm, so the rain washes it off for the most part. So it's safe to put in there. There's just a little bit of salt, just enough to make slugs unhappy. So by putting seaweed in your tomato planting, you're actually getting rid of slugs at the same time. So you're reducing the potential for soil evaporation of water. So you don't have to water as often. You reduce the incidence of blight on your tomatoes. And, so you don't have to water as often. You don't have to weed as often because you have a weed barrier. Your mulch creates a barrier to prevent weeds from growing. And, it creates a protective barrier to prevent blight from affecting your plants. Right? So you're saving a lot of things like that. So, there's a lot of ways to really save labor and save effort. So let's get some more of this comfrey. So like I said, this whole bag was just one plant. Very large plants, very vigorous. Comfrey is also known as bone stitch. So if you have an injury, a deep bruise, a broken bone, you get hit pretty hard, you can take the comfrey, mush it up, and you can put it on your skin, cover it with a rag just to hold it in place, and the nutrients that come out of that help your body heal itself. So to help heal different things. It's a traditional method of helping speed up the healing process. Now, I'm not giving medical advice. I'm not a doctor. These are just some things that I've learned about certain herbs and vegetables and stuff like that. So don't take this as medical advice, right? I don't want the lawyers come after me here. But basically, like, these are, like, the natural world is so composed of so many plants that have so many characteristics that are valuable and useful. And these traditional knowledge is the kind of thing that we want to keep alive, because we never know. Sometimes you have something growing right next to you that you might never notice, but has a lot of value and provides a lot of stuff to you. So comfrey here is one of the superhero plants in gardening, particularly in permaculture and organic gardening. Oh wait, I didn't water it. The food's here. Okay, we got the last bag and we're done. We're done. Oh, actually. There we go. Now, one last thing. If the compost pile doesn't want to warm up, something wrong, you didn't put in enough nitrogen-rich material. And you want to get it going. The trick to that, and I'm kind of hesitate to give you this suggestion, but don't judge me now. All right, so if we don't have enough nitrogen in our pile, okay, so at this point, you want to, it's been there, sitting there for a little while, it's staying cold, there's no heat coming out of it. What do? You open up a hole in the middle like so, open up a hole like so, then you grab a bucket, get all your friends and your family members, and everybody add a little urine to your bucket. So basically pass the bucket around, bring a little back room and stuff like that. Urine is an excellent source of nitrogen. It's very nitrogen rich. It's got phosphorus, it's got potassium, it's got all kinds of nutrients. It's reasonably safe to use, right? Provided the source of the people that are contributing to your bucket are not on heavy medication, not taking like cancer medication, that kind of stuff, not on heavy drugs or anything like that. Basically, just collect that, water it down 20-1. So if you get a little bit on the bottom of your bucket, just fill up the rest of your bucket and upend it in the middle of the hole you just made in your compost pile. It'll seep through, it'll perpetuate inside the middle of your compost, and within 4 days, that should warm up. All right? So there's other ways to do that too. You can also take some manure, whatever source of manure you've got, you can put that in the bucket, water it down, fill it with a lot of water, and dump that in there as well. But urine, everybody's got urine, right? So that's a safe thing to use, like I said, as long as it's coming from people who are healthy, they're not on like weird drugs or anything like that, so that you want to have your good, clean material. So like I said, don't judge me. It works. But it just goes to show, like, biology is very powerful to create fertility. So that said, now that I ruined everybody's appetite,
Lunch is ready.
that's it.
Thank you.
Hey, no problem at all.